Thank you all for showing up this morning to officially welcome back Kelly Kroskoff as the president of basketball business operations for the Indiana Fever.
Nobody saw this coming. The president of the Indiana Fever, the woman sitting at the very top of the organization, finally said the quiet part out loud. And the second those words hit the public, they didn't just raise eyebrows. They set the entire basketball world on fire. For the first time, the truth about what's really happening behind the scenes in Indiana. The politics, the pressure, the locker room dynamics, the battle between building a brand and building a championship contender, all of it cracked wide open. And once you hear the full story, it completely changes the way you look at Caitlin Clark's situation with the Fever. To understand why this exploded the way it did, you have to go back to where the story actually started. Before Caitlin Clark ever put on an Indiana Fever jersey, Indiana had become one of the most forgettable franchises in professional basketball. We're talking 6 wins in 2021, 5 wins in 2022, and just 13 wins in 2023. For nearly an entire decade, the franchise had faded into irrelevance. No excitement. No national spotlight. No packed arenas. TV cameras weren't showing up, and fans weren't filling the seats. The WNBA had essentially moved on from whatever the Fever used to represent. That was the reality. A once respected franchise that had become an afterthought. And then, out of nowhere, everything changed overnight. The number 1 overall pick in the 2024 WNBA draft walked through the door, and suddenly the entire league shifted on its axis. Caitlin Clark didn't just transform the Fever, she transformed women's basketball itself. Sellout crowds followed her everywhere. Television ratings shattered records. Jerseys disappeared off shelves. Media attention reached levels the sport had honestly never seen before. Right in the middle of that explosion, the organization faced a massive decision. Were they going to fully embrace the wave Clark created and build around it completely? Or were they going to try steering the spotlight somewhere else? That's where this story really starts getting interesting. Because right when the Fever needed leadership that fully understood the magnitude of what they had, a once-in-a-generation player redefining what was possible for women's sports, the front office made a move that caught a lot of people by surprise. They hired Kelly Kroskoff as the new president of basketball and business operations. On paper, the decision made sense. Kroskoff helped build the Fever years earlier and was part of the organization's 2012 championship run. She knew the franchise inside and out. The team rolled out the red carpet for her return. But from the very first press conference, there was something in her messaging that quietly raised concerns. At the time, most people brushed it aside. Months later though, those same comments would come back and haunt the organization in a major way. The warning signs were sitting there in plain sight the entire time. People just didn't realize it until much later. Fast forward to July 2025. The Fever are struggling through Caitlin Clark's injury absence. By that point, she had only played 11 games while battling a lingering groin issue that had clearly been bothering her for weeks. Fans were frustrated. The team was clinging to the playoff race. Pressure was building from every direction. And right in the middle of all of that chaos, social media suddenly resurfaced footage from Kroskoff's original October 2024 introductory press conference. That's when people discovered a comment buried in the speech that almost everyone had overlooked the first time around. During that press conference, Kelly Kroskoff looked directly into the cameras and said, "This is about the Indiana Fever. Yes, we have foundational players in Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston, and we're going to continue to build around that. But I want this team to become a leader in the country and an enduring brand, like Apple or something." 5 words. Like Apple or something. That was enough to ignite an explosion online. Within hours, the clip spread everywhere, and the Fever fanbase erupted. Because to a lot of people listening, that statement didn't sound inspiring, it sounded revealing. Fans heard an organization talking about the brand itself instead of fully centering the player who had made the franchise relevant again. The reaction was intense, organized, and impossible to ignore. Fans weren't just irritated, they were furious. And the reason the Apple comparison hit so hard was because of what Apple actually represents. The company built its entire identity around one visionary figure, Steve Jobs. And when he was gone, the company struggled to maintain that same identity. So when Clark supporters heard the Fever president use that analogy, many took it as a warning sign. To them, it sounded like the organization viewed Caitlin Clark as just another piece of the machine instead of the engine driving all of it. One fan fired back online saying, "Enduring brands lean into their visionary." Another was even harsher, warning that if Clark ever decided she'd had enough of what they called a front office disaster, the Fever would realize they wasted the biggest opportunity in women's sports history. Across social media, the message stayed the same: you do not downplay the most important player this franchise has ever had. And the backlash wasn't just internet noise. It was a full-scale verdict from the fan base. Someone inside the organization clearly recognized how quickly things were spiraling because within hours of the clip going viral, Kelly Krauskopf's X account disappeared completely. Gone. No explanation. No statement. Just silence. But while the front office was getting hammered online, something very different was happening on the court. The players actually sharing the floor with Caitlin Clark every night were telling a completely different story, one that felt much more honest than the narratives being pushed from the outside. Lexi Hull, one of Clark's closest teammates and friends, sat down for a feature with Glamour magazine and openly acknowledged something many people around the league already suspected. She admitted there was jealousy surrounding the Fever because of the attention the team had received since Clark arrived. Hull even revealed that opposing teams were openly talking about Indiana in their own locker rooms, saying things like, "We can't let the Fever win." Her comments pulled the curtain back on a truth that had been building for months. The Fever weren't just another basketball team anymore. Every single game had become emotionally charged because of one player on the roster. Then Sophie Cunningham took things even further. Cunningham had already earned a reputation as Clark's protector on the court, the teammate who made it clear early on that cheap shots wouldn't go unanswered. And according to Sophie, these conversations about Clark weren't hidden at all. She said she heard them before she even joined Indiana while still playing in Phoenix. Opponents weren't simply trying to beat Clark, they were trying to send a message. That narrative about Clark constantly being targeted physically, about the so-called welcome to the W treatment that never seemed to stop, became impossible to ignore as the season unfolded. By the time Clark's groin injury eventually sidelined her after just 13 games, serious questions were being asked about whether officiating had done enough to protect her. And according to a growing number of observers, the answer was clearly no. But beneath all of that public controversy was another story developing quietly behind the scenes, the reality of what it was actually like being Caitlin Clark's teammate. Critics had spent months pushing the idea that Clark created tension inside the locker room. That players secretly resented the fame, the media attention, and the spotlight surrounding her. Even Cheryl Swoops added fuel to that narrative during a 2024 podcast appearance, claiming some Fever players privately didn't want to be there anymore because of everything surrounding Clark. The story spread quickly and became part of the constant noise around the team. But when Caitlin Clark herself was finally asked about those rumors during an alternative March Madness broadcast hosted by Diana Taurasi and Sue Bird, her response was calm and direct. She basically explained that people outside the locker room always think they know what's happening behind closed doors when they really don't. And after that, the people actually inside the Fever locker room kept proving her point. When Clark returned from injury during the 2025 playoffs, teammates rushed onto the court to celebrate her. They interrupted her post-game interviews. During the Commissioner's Cup celebration, the chemistry looked completely genuine. It wasn't staged. It wasn't forced. Players looked truly happy for each other. And that's when the bigger picture finally started becoming clear. The real story of the Fever was never about whether Caitlin Clark's teammates liked her. The real issue was whether the front office above them was fully committed to building the right team around her. That's the tension at the center of all of this. Because inside the locker room, the relationship seemed authentic. Aaliyah Boston and Clark were clearly close. Lexi Hull openly defended her. New arrivals like Sophie Cunningham praised Clark before even playing alongside her. Rookie Michaela Timpson spoke about Clark with obvious admiration. Even Clark's emotional social media messages to departing teammates showed genuine connection. The relationships weren't fake. But chemistry alone doesn't build a championship contender. And that's where Kelly Krauskopf's full message becomes important. Because buried beyond the Apple quote was another point that many people missed in the outrage. Krauskopf talked about the long-term vision. She mentioned that Caitlin Clark had been only 10 years old when the Fever won their championship in 2012, and she spoke about building something that could inspire the next generation of players growing up right now. Whether you see that as genuine vision or corporate deflection probably depends on how much trust you have in the organization's priorities. But one thing absolutely cannot be debated: the explosion of attention around Indiana starting in 2024 happened because of a player, not because of branding strategies. Fans traveled hours to watch Caitlin Clark play. Ticket prices reached levels the WNBA had never seen before. Television ratings exploded. And whenever Clark wasn't on the floor because of injury, the drop-off in attention was immediate and measurable. Ticket sales dipped. Ratings fell. Interest cooled dramatically. The reality of what Clark meant to the franchise, in pure business terms, became impossible to deny. Yet despite all of that, the messaging from the top kept circling back to the team, the institution, and the brand, almost separating Clark from the very phenomenon she created. To Krauskopf's credit, though, she did say something during that original press conference that ended up being more accurate than anyone realized at the time. She said smart basketball players would want to play with Caitlin Clark. And that prediction turned out to be true. Indiana quietly became one of the most attractive destinations in the entire league. Veterans were taking pay cuts for the opportunity to play alongside Clark. Free agents were drawn not only by her playstyle, but by the energy surrounding the franchise. The fanbase Clark helped create transformed the Fever into something bigger than an ordinary WNBA team. Not because of a marketing campaign, but because one basketball player made the entire experience feel important again. Now fast forward into 2026, and the Fever are entering a crucial chapter. The franchise lost players like Kelsey Mitchell and Christy Wallace in expansion moves. Clark's sophomore season, which was supposed to become her breakout year, instead turned into a frustrating battle with injuries that limited her to only 13 games. Yet even with all of that, she still averaged 16.5 points, 8.5 assists, and 5 rebounds, still made the All-Star team, and still remained the gravitational center of the entire league, even while sitting courtside in street clothes. Meanwhile, the organization continued working on a massive $78 million performance center scheduled to open in 2027, a facility Krauskopf described as the foundation for the franchise's future. The infrastructure is there. The opportunity is there. The only real question now is whether the people running the franchise fully understand what they have before it's too late. Because underneath every argument about front office politics, every controversy about teammates, every viral debate surrounding the Fever, the truth is actually very simple. This franchise went from winning 5 games a season to becoming the most watched team in women's basketball almost overnight. That's not just a rebuild, it's a revolution. And revolutions don't happen because of branding strategies or corporate messaging. They happen because of once-in-a-generation athletes who completely change the gravity of a sport. That's why Kelly Krauskopf's comments sparked such an intense reaction. Fans immediately recognized the danger in focusing too heavily on the brand, instead of fully embracing the superstar driving all of it. History has already shown what happens when organizations try replacing transcendent players with logos and slogans. But the people inside that locker room, the players sharing the floor with Caitlin Clark every night, seem to understand the truth better than anyone. Over and over again, through interviews, social media posts, celebrations, and emotional moments, they keep saying the same thing in different ways. Playing alongside Caitlin Clark is a rare opportunity that doesn't come around twice. And if the Fever are smart, the people making decisions at the very top of the organization will start treating it exactly that way. Because one thing is crystal clear, the window is open right now. The question isn't whether the opportunity exists. The question is whether they're bold enough to fully seize it before it disappears.